suitable punishment that is of the same weight and value to the crime. So I guess when you have corporal punishment where people are executed, now is that to me, in my mind, is that punishment there's nothing to justify killing someone, right? But on the flip side, a parent saying, hey, put that thing down, and the kid's waving a pair of scissors or is snatched a knife from the kitchen table, and they're not listening to you. You're saying it nicely, saying it 3-4 times, and they're still waving this sharp thing, and they potentially hurt themselves. Well, the last result will be you may slap them across the bottom on the back of the leg and say, just to shock them out of it, say, no, please stop. So it's that fine line between a suitable punishment, suitable approach to discipline to the crime or this incident or the situation. I'm pretty sure Brad will probably agree to that as well.
Yeah, I agree. So the only time I've really ever hit my son is when he's trying to shove something in a PowerPoint. So sort of like, a smack on the hand is a lot less of a punishment than letting him electrocute himself to learn.
Yeah, so if the punishment outweighs the benefit in that that's the basis.
I would suggest, that we don't stack ourselves into punishment word, because punishment word is actually serving certain intentions. And that force actually is to bring something better in the child's life. So punishment in itself is not an existential entity. It is just a notion to say we want certain objective to be achieved by the child, and we are calling it punishment for the sake of punishment, but actually we are trying to serve some purpose out of it, right?
There's also the adverse of rewarding. So rewarding good behavior as well. So not just punishing the bad behavior, but also rewarding the good behavior.
Rather than punishment, do you think the word discipline is relevant in this scenario where discipline, it could be in that category, but where you have certain different activities as such, and where you're not actually going into actually using force in a way to teach a lesson, but you're using a form of art or some sort of activities that makes them go in that right direction. So a bit of a guidance rather than more of a form of punishment. No.
I think actually the topic is more, how do you teach? Is it the stick or carrot? I think that way at least it is not so narrow.
The stick or the carrot, I like that. That's it.
All right. On that, Ian, what do you think the best way of teaching is, the best way of disciplining?
So something that while you guys were speaking that I was thinking about was the times when I was a kid where I was doing things that were wrong, and I knew that they were wrong and I was still doing them anyway. And at the time, I don't think I knew why. Not necessarily that it was how wrong it was, why it was that it was wrong. It was the why I was doing the wrong thing, even though that I knew that it would result in whatever punishment. And I think it's only been later in life when I've been able to reflect now on those decisions as to why those things were happening. And the two things that what I like to say is that there's the thing that someone is doing wrong, and then there's the greater thing, which is I was supposed to come home from school, primary school, and be home by 4 o'clock. But what I used to do every day, I used to go to the games parlor, and I would be there until like 4:45. And, being 12 or 11 years old, that would freak my parents out. So the wrong thing I was doing was not coming home on time. But the reason behind that was because there were a lot of difficulties at home. But at the time, it wasn't something that I understood. So even though I knew it was the wrong thing to do, even though I knew that it would result in some severe punishment, I guess the underlying impulse that drove those decisions kind of overrid that. And this is why I think that it's interesting in the context of punishing people or rewarding people. People don't always know why they're doing the wrong thing, and people will get punished for doing the wrong thing, but that's actually not the systemic issue that needs to be solved. So, again, coming from someone without children, it's far more easy for me to kind of say things like, oh, look at the bigger picture when you're smacking your kid. But I'd like to hear your, Brad and Spiro's thoughts on this.
I don't know. It's difficult. A good example would be when I was younger, I was one of those children that used to run away all the time. And rather than fixing the problem of why I was running away, it was more, punishing for running away. So, it's hard to say.
Because at that time, to get to the bottom of the cause is at that age, you won't be able to comprehend that, right?
You don't understand the difference, at that age between Band-Aid fixes and actually fixing the issue.
But I mean, like for me, the reason why I wanted to ask you guys is as parents, like, okay, so your child is trying to stick a fork in a socket. That necessarily is a wrong thing to do. But is the systemic issue that the house is not baby proof? As an example, like obviously when they're at a very young age, kids don't understand what they're doing in general. So it's very hard to do a more big picture kind of view of it. But when you're definitely between the ages of 6 and 18, I would say that when we try and teach kids, we don't treat issues, we only treat symptoms.
Haven't neurologists shown that we don't really develop the part of the brain that really understands consequences effectively until we're about the age of 21? So until that age, until you literally have matured enough, you really can't project your mind and yourself forward enough to think, if I do this, bad things can happen, or if I do this, this will happen. A lot of the punishments that we do, or a lot of experience in childhood, or the way we behave towards our children, stems from the fact that we don't know, we can't judge the situation correctly, and we can't foresee any problems from what we're doing, our actions. On the flip side, there's also a approach. Some people are just heavy-handed with everything they do, and laws are restrictions, and because of social norms. Therefore, if you break that, that's a different thing. That's sort of a belief in a person just can't see what the future holds. It's more like the social norm dictates this, and if you break this norm, you're suddenly going to be punished. Like, for example, when I was 5 years old, I was reprimanded by my kindergarten teacher for drawing outside of the lines and colouring my frog red as opposed to green like the rest of the classmates. Mm-hmm. Now, that is pretty pointless. It's a coloured frog. I'm 5 years old. Seriously, like, why would anyone genuinely get upset by that? But, I was told that's not the way you colour a frog. Frogs are green. You went outside the squares. But the social norm is you always draw between the lines. There's the idea. So that's a really trivial, but as a 5-year-old, it really impacts me, because I firstly dislike teachers, hate authority, and basically try and do whatever I want as much as I can, and don't like being told what to do. So, hey, it really affected me. But then you have other scenarios where you're a teenager and you're 15, 16 years old, and you steal a pack of smokes, and you steal a car, you go for a joyride. This kid's a minor, really can't think it through, really has potentially bad home life, limited education. The influences, the impacts on that individual are great. And we're going to basically, and if they get caught by the police, they get nicked. Well, 15-year-old teenager, you're nicked, you've done something bad, you're going to pay the consequences. The kid doesn't even know what happened, doesn't know where it came from, where the impulse came to even steal the car, where the impulse came to steal the smokes, what pressures the society, his peers have applied to that person. So we judge crimes poorly. We tend to not really look at the overall picture, not in a holistic way. We tend to go A equals B, therefore the punishment is C. And that seems to be the norm, because it's actually usually the fastest way to get a result in a court, or just a result in society.
Can I just say one thing? I think in the flip side of that coin, I think we excuse people too much for their behavior based on, it wasn't me, it was the video games. It wasn't me, it was the abusive parents. It wasn't me, it was the nanny who touched me. It was always somebody else's fault. And I think sometimes, people have to take responsibility for their actions. Even as you mentioned, 15-year-old kids, if he's going for a joyride, he knows what he's doing. He might not see the fact what happens when he gets done, or the implications of his actions, but I'm sure he's aware of what he's doing on some level. It's just, that's the thing. There's always somebody else to blame behind their actions, and I'm thinking that if you grow up with your parents telling you that whatever you do, there are going to be consequences, and not because they're going to punish you or discipline you or not feed you or whatever you want to call it, but if you give them the control or power, because I think a lot of the times when kids misbehave, it's all about a power trip. They want to go against your authority. They want to go because you can't tell me what to do. And if they want to stick something in electrical socket, it's because they're getting no attention from you. That could be it. Maybe you're just not showing them any attention whatsoever. And the only way for them to act out is to do something that will actually get your attention, which is stop doing that. That's attention. That's the wrong kind of attention, but it's still attention. That's just my kind of 2 cents.
Yes, they want attention from the parent or from their peers and stuff. So is it their crime? Is it then their issue? I mean, yes, they may be aware, but they're putting the risk of being caught by the police lower than the fear of, or the desire to have acceptance by their peers or attention by their parents. So it's not I don't think it's a really black and white answer. It's actually all of the above.
And even to extend that even further, some people like the punishment, if that makes sense. Some people, no, in the sense that people feel like they deserve it. Like, I know that growing up, we didn't have a lot of money, and I always felt incredibly responsible as a 11-year-old kid that obviously doesn't have a job and doesn't have any say on the household finances. But just the mere fact that I existed and I was causing these problems because I was a kid and that my family was struggling, sometimes you feel like you deserve punishment, even if you don't. So yeah, it's a very complex, I guess, situation from a kid's perspective, and from an adult's perspective, it's probably even more complex because we're only viewing from our own glass, as Atish would say. And as an adult, your glass is that you understand what is responsible, what is irresponsible, what is good behavior, what is bad behavior, what is consequences. And as you were saying, Spirit, just as a kid, you're just not mentally developed enough yet to understand it.
As a parent or a guardian or a teacher, the role that I see is that knowing that you are not equipped with knowing everything which is the right and the wrong in that scenario, where the action that the kid was doing, in the first instance, I understand, in the first instance, you want to make sure the kid is protected and is safe and also everything above. But at the same time, some of these activities that the kid is doing, it might be beneficial in the long run. Like, there is always that approach you take in knowing that you want to give a bit of freedom available to the kid already up front, just to let them know that they're not from the beginning, they don't have that instilled on them that there's someone looking out over you all the time, which they will carry on to the future. That's something I think more and more I see, the responsibility aspect of it, of the parent and the guardian, the teacher. They have to let the kid ride the bicycle on his own. I think with that, we can wrap up the episode.
Before I wrap it up, let's bring it back to Will Smith. Firstly, happy birthday, Will Smith. Hopefully you survived jumping out of a helicopter into the Grand Canyon. I saw the video of him announcing it, and there's a bit of fear in his eyes, but he was also incredibly excited. He's privileged enough to be able to do such a thing. But at the same time, he's hitting 50, and he's obviously quite fit, and he's doing well for himself. So as a parent, is he doing the responsible thing for his family by taking that risk? It comes down to, if the roles were reversed and that was his kid jumping out of it and he did it without telling him, would that kid get punished? Would he be like, hey, you're a minor, you don't know any better. I think he's got 2 kids. Like, you've just jumped out of a helicopter with a bungee into the Grand Canyon. Are you insane? That type of thing, as a parent may approach him. So is it okay? So is it now a bit of hypocrisy that the parents could get away with it? Yeah, and then the
it's quite interesting. Yeah, it's quite interesting how the Will Smith family, the way they are raising their kids, and they've been within the media, they've been sort of scrutinized for that. The fact that the way they are giving their kids a lot of freedom in that sense, where they're allowing them to grow in their own independent way, which is, again, each parenting and guardian to themselves. And that's what it comes down to. It boils down to what kind of style you want to lead. And Will Smith, I reckon, is leading by example and is doing his right thing. Again, everyone is up to their own sort of decision making, but I'll leave that to the audience.
I think also dependence is a bit loose in that family because, they all seem to have their own ventures and have quite a bit of money behind them. So that's sort of taken out of the equation for them as well.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure Jaden was punished by being forced to be in After Earth, which was a terrible, terrible movie.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Atish, would you like to finalize anything before we close off? Your thoughts on this, the style of parenting and leadership and guardians?
What can I say? I just say that same thing. Velocity comes with friction. So just keep on hanging around the friction.
Okay.
Sorry for my abstract language.
It sounds like a T-shirt phrase. Something you write on a T-shirt.
Do you want to do the intro again?
We'll make that into a T-shirt. It'll be sold on our website.
See, whatever framework you put in place, right, for your kid, whatever his existential intelligence or whatever we call it, that energy, whatever direction it has to take, it will take. You want to make him an engineer or want to make him a doctor, ultimately he or she will land up to where he or she organically from their inside, they will be driven to. So you can only play around the shallow boundaries surface boundaries, which is meaningful, definitely, but ultimately that inner force, the nurturing of that inner force, so that it takes its trajectory to something expanded, something meaningful, that will take place. As a parent, we are just taking care of the edges. I mean, this is just my personal opinion.
Taking care of, just passing the burden on, the torch on. That's what it is, right?
That's it, yeah.
Simon, did you have any?
I didn't see the Will Smith jump or whatever, but in my opinion, he just wants to remain relevant. I think, I don't know any movies he's done lately. They're any good. I mean,